The Etruscans developed a reputation for being the most mysterious of ancient Mediterranean peoples. Partly, of course, because we cannot read their language very well, and also because they had elaborate religious rituals. North of the Latins in Rome, there was another group. Italian archaeologist Pericle Ducati named them after ruins discovered near the town of Villanova. Arriving in north-central Italy before 1000 BCE, they exploited the metal-rich areas of the region, and they developed key towns such as Cerveteri and Tarquinia. Trading and mingling with Greeks, Phoenicians of ancient Carthage in North Africa, and even the Latins, they developed into the people north of Rome whom we call the Etruscans. The Etruscans took over Rome in the later 7th century BCE and decided to create a forum in the swampy area there.
When they decide that they want to do something else with the forum, their first order of business is to do something with the water. There is this flooding that comes into the valley at irregular times. You can be predicted. The Tiber is a very unruly river. It was a river that really created enormous problems for the city of Rome throughout its history. So the problem is the valley is big, and so you need a lot of dirt or other material to fill it up. The other, of course, big piece of architectural work is the drainage under the forum, the so-called Loch Maxima, the Great Drain, that had to be built at the same time when the forum was built. And the only problem is archaeologically it has been patched up and built and rebuilt so many times, and it's still working today as a major storm drain in that area of the city.
But where did these Etruscan invaders come from? Where did these Etruscans come from? Who were they? In the mid-20th century, the distinguished Etruscologist Massimo Palatino of the University of Rome demonstrated continuities in tomb construction and pottery between the Villanovans and the later people we're now calling the Etruscans. Today, widespread genetic research is also weighing in on this question of who the Etruscans originally were. But it's a difficult problem. How much mixing with local Italic tribes did the Villanovans or the Etruscans actually do? To what extent did they assimilate foreigners such as Greeks and mingle their DNA with them? Current genetic research suggests connections of the Etruscan people with Anatolia, that is, the area of modern Turkey, or with Syria. These analyses don't all agree, and the dispute over the absolute origins of the Etruscans continues.
In part, the question about Etruscan origins is age-old. Herodotus in the 5th century BC went about talking about the story of the Lydians who had to divide their population, and half of the population got on a ship and sailed to Italy and landed on the Italian shores and came off these ready-made Etruscans. And there's no archaeological evidence that supports this. In fact, we have plenty of archaeological evidence that says that Etruscan culture was born on Italian soil.
If we look at them in terms of material culture, then they're incredibly complex. Things are coming from all over the Mediterranean. There are things from the Near East. There are things, their art looks very Greek at certain points and looks very non-Western at others. So that also is very difficult to define. Ethnically, I don't know where to begin. I don't know how we would even do that except through DNA. And I think the DNA evidence is absolutely fascinating. But I think it's a little early yet. There's so little of it. I think that the data is very questionable. The sampling is also very questionable. I suspect within a few decades we will have all sorts of new evidence.
The Etruscans of the early 7th century BCE were governed by an aristocracy in many of their communities. This separation of power between rich and poor can be seen, for example, in the gigantic tombs built by the wealthy at sites such as Cerveteri, or Caire as it's called. Although looting of tombs by Italy's highly effective tombaroli managed to clean out most of the Etruscan tombs long before modern times, a number of tombs were found intact. Among them, the famous Regolini Galassi tomb, discovered in 1836 after investigations by two amateur archaeologists, well, really treasure seekers, who were working on Vatican-controlled land. One was the local priest of Cerveteri, Alessandro Regolini, and the other his friend, General Vincenzo Galassi. The discoveries these two fellows made were astonishing, revealing stunning gold artworks, the use of an alphabet which blended the age-old Villanovan unwritten language with the newly formed letter characters developed by the Phoenicians. And discoveries like that show why even today it's easy for us to read Etruscan because it looks like our own alphabet. But we have great difficulty translating what they mean, what the words are, and what they're trying to say, because all these words are different from our words. So it's written a lot like the way we write, but we just can't figure out much of the time what they're trying to say, although we're slowly getting better at it. Cerveteri was one of the major Villanovan communities, which developed into an Etruscan city-state and an international trading center. Since much Etruscan domestic architecture was built of oak, Quercus cerus, oak, and other perishable materials, it is through the Necropolis, the city of the dead, that we come to know a site because the tombs were carved into the natural stone underground. This is why they survive. The tombs featured a long entrance, known in Greek as a dromos, and one descended through a flight of steps to reach the burial chamber, which is known as the camera, C-A-M-E-R-A. The front door of the tomb was sealed up with a vertically placed sigillum, S-I-G-I-L-L-U-M, or stone slab, to discourage robbers. Reaching the antechamber right away, one could see a little hollowed-out area called an aula, or wing, which would be carved to the left and to the right of the entry door, right after you've come into the antechamber. In these hollowed-out areas, to left and right, grave goods and even a subsequent burial or two might be placed. The antechamber itself was found straight ahead from the entry, and it contained, in the Regolini Galassi tomb, the burial of a male, laid out on a bed and surrounded with honorary bronze shields. There were also iron spits used as money before coins existed. But this was just the antechamber, apparently a burial made subsequent to the one in the main back chamber. That back chamber contained the remains of a woman, but not just any woman, a woman whose name was perhaps Larthia, L-A-R-T-H-I-A, and who was Etruscan royalty. She was found associated with an ornate throne nearby, and she was laid out on her back with a magnificently made pectoral on her chest, a gold work with parallels in ancient Assyria to the east, and even such things are mentioned in the Bible. A burial like this shows the extraordinary importance and value that could be placed on women in Etruscan society. In addition, a beautifully crafted fibula, an elaborately decorated gold pin which was a foot high, was recovered from the body, no doubt pinning a now missing garment, a royal garment, to her. Fibulae, these pins, were commonly used to fasten clothing in antiquity, but Etruscan examples often had remarkable decoration. The main body of this thing featured what appears to be separately made and soldered on ducks and griffins, while stylized lions adorn the upper part of the disc. Gold wire called filigree and tiny balls of decoration called granulation were also widely employed. Well, how did the Etruscans, who inherited their skills, metalworking, of course, from the Villanovans, how did they manage to create such magnificent gold work? Well, I was determined to find out, so I asked an expert. Fred Zweig is a famous Arizona metalsmith, and he's also a historian of metals. And we've asked Fred to see if he could help us figure out what these ancient Etruscans did in making this beautiful gold filigree and granulation. And what are we going to do here?
I'm creating this design here, something that was used in Etruscan times on some of the decorations. I'm separating out evenly these snippets that I've created. The Etruscans were known to have made some that were 1/10 of a millimeter in diameter.
They must have had incredible eyesight, Fred, and it seems to me they couldn't have done it for a very long period of time.
I suspect that they used kids to lay this out. So now I'm going to light the torch, and
yeah, I'm going to have my eyebrows grow back after that.
so now I will carefully heat until these guys form little spheres. Many times you actually do find samples like that where they're not quite perfectly round, but they didn't want to spend the time to do them again.
So these are what we call the granules of the granulation. That's what they are.
That is correct.
And you don't realize until you sit down with someone like yourself the amazing amount of work and detail that goes into it, and the amount of eye strain that would be produced to doing this kind of thing over a period of time.
This is the copper that allows the granules to bind together. And I'm going to use a mandrel here. Mandrel is just a shape for me to wrap this wire around.
Okay. I didn't know you could do so many things with gold, moving it around and changing shapes. And
it's wonderful material. Yeah. It's one of the most malleable of all metals.
Such fine work. One thing I'm learning from this is I have to go and get my eyes checked. It's just so fine and so detailed. Etruscan workshops that were turning these things out would probably, as you say, use children for their eyes, and you'd probably be apprenticing at a very young age then. Well, this is a very delicate moment of the operation here.
By propping it on this little nest of iron binding wire, where the heat can actually tackle it from all sides, from underneath.
It must be very difficult to get the little granules to be of the same size.
That is the trick of trying to cut them all the same.
Yeah.
And then after you do that, I've cut out some steps here because I didn't want to take the time to sort every single one of these.
And so on ancient Etruscan works, we actually can see that the granules do vary. You have the feeling, looking at the work, that there is a similarity of size that's really quite remarkable. I think it gives you a real appreciation of how difficult the ancient technique was. And I thank you very much for giving us a chance to have that special window back in time. I will never look at any of these pieces of filigree or granulation in the same way again. The early tombs at Cerveteri, such as that Regolini Galassi tomb, once they were dug down into the earth, were covered over with a huge mound of earth. And this is known as a tumulus burial. The earth was all kept within a bordering stone curb known as a crepice, carved from the natural rock, and then embellished, built up with added masonry. While the tomb revealed some examples of the cruder impasto ware of the Villanovans, the Regalini Galassi tomb also revealed a smoother, better-made, dark pottery, which could be produced now on the wheel, on the potter's wheel, and in various shapes, sometimes with influence from Villanovan shapes and forms, and sometimes from Greek forms. This pottery, which is smooth to the touch and elegantly black, has come to be known as bucaro and is a hallmark of the Etruscan ceramic production from the 7th through the 4th centuries BCE. It was particularly used to furnish the tombs of the deceased, along with the highly prized Greek pottery. Etruscans loved Greek pottery. A great deal of Greek and bucaro pottery has been recovered from the archaeological site of Tarquinia, just 65 miles north of Cerveteri. This site is also particularly known for the beautiful painting in its tombs. One of them is the Cardarelli tomb. One of the earliest Etruscan centers was Tarquinia, which had a necropolis, or city of the dead, with marvelous painted tombs. Tarquinia was one of the Etruscan cities that was noted for having beautiful tombs and tomb painting. A tomb like this, the Cardarelli tomb, named after one of Tarquinia's most famous local poets, was a beautiful, magnificent place to experience. On one of the walls you can see the Porta Libertinensis, it's the door of death, and from this you go through that and you never would return again. And the wall is flanked by musicians. This one is erased, maybe a lyre player. On this side you have someone playing the aulos, or the beautiful double flute. And on this wall we have this wonderful, elegant woman, and these kinds of ladies, these fine Etruscan ladies, were almost venerated in their time. She has a tutulus, she has a kind of cap on her head, and then wears this beautiful mantle, and very beautiful profile with a long nose and a rounded chin. It's very much the tradition in the East Greek world that's being captured here. And she has this lovely long robe and attendants who might have a fan and a deep bowl and a mirror looking after her, making sure she is well taken care of. And these Etruscan women were really quite important in their day, and she even has lovely shoes on as well that are long and pointy. This was considered quite the fashion for these Etruscans. They were very, very style conscious. In antiquity, the Etruscans were very much noted for their ability to make bronzes, and one of their specialties was mirrors, which could be used in a lady's toilette, but could also be put into tombs. Many of them are found in the tombs. And there's also, in every important Etruscan's tomb, some Greek pottery. They love to have pottery all the way from Athens, something like this here, this one. So it isn't surprising to find a Greek original pot in one of their tombs. And they also had elegant pottery of their own, a beautiful blackware that has a sort of soapy feel, which is called bucaro ware. And the early bucaro was very thin, very delicate, made in the 7th century and into the 6th, called thin bucaro or bucaro sottile. It was just really lovely. And then there's a heavier, later bucaro they start to make in the 6th century BC called pesante, or heavier bucaro. And some of the chalices, drinking vessels, and the kylix examples, the drinking cups that they would have like this, were really very elegantly made. Not much is known about the ancient town of Tarquinia itself, but the Necropolis, the plural of one necropolis or city of the dead, tell a detailed story of the cult of the dead and the exuberance in life felt by the Etruscans. The colorful tomb paintings of Tarquinia were derived from a narrow palette of locally available materials. Malachite, for example, produced green. Calcium, copper, silicate produced a deep blue. Reddish brown came from the iron-rich earth, and yellow was the dangerous arsenic sulfide. With a date range from the 6th through the 1st centuries BCE, these tomb decorations tell us a great deal about ancient Etruscan life and mysterious rituals in Tarquinia. For example, let's consider one of these rituals, which we can see in something which has been misnamed, but it's called the Tomb of the Augurs. The Tomb of the Augurs shows us what appears to be a strange and bloody funerary ritual, or even maybe a blood sacrifice for the dead. The Etruscans loved the art and religious stories of the Greeks, and even fused, or what we say, syncretized, many of their myths into their own religion. Stories about Erclu or Hercules or Heracles were particularly popular, and in this tomb we may actually have one of Heracles' 12 labors depicted. To atone for his sins, Heracles was sent to perform many tasks, among them capturing the Hound of Hell, known as Cerberus, the guardian of the Underworld. And here we see a sacrificial victim, perhaps a criminal or a captured enemy, enacting Heracles' famous labor. The man is forced to wear a bag over his head as wild black dogs attack him. A strange masked man, labeled a Firsu and dressed in an old-fashioned full-head mask, entwines the hapless man with rope, thus making his attempt to cope with his situation all the more difficult and unpleasant. The man bleeds profusely from the dogs biting at his legs. This is apparently a funerary game or blood sacrifice, a practice also known to the later Romans. In the same tomb, we meet mourners bidding farewell to the deceased by touching their hair and gesturing goodbye. This tomb dates to what we call the Archaic period. It's the time after the Orientalizing period, and it falls between 600 and 500 BCE, when stylistic advances, strongly fed from Greek centers such as Athens and Corinth, have contributed to the look of the figures. This can be seen well in Tarquinia's Tomb of the Lionesses. The dancing figures, while still stiff and lacking knowledge of weight shift or actual stances or posture, have advanced technically. They have large almond eyes, thick thighs, distinctive hair braids, at least much of the time, and carefully rendered faces now. And it is better to leave today's lecture, then, on a positive note, with dancing and joy, rather than with the dark human sacrifices of the Tomb of the Augurs. And yet, strangely, both extremes seem to have been a part of Etruscan culture. You know, the Etruscans were Rome's neighbors to the north, as we've established, and the Romans were sometimes friendly with some of the Etruscan city-states, such as Cerveteri, but more often rivals or enemies of city-states such as Veii. However, Greek culture and art were popular in Etruria. Some of the most famous Greek vases were found in Etruria in Etruscan tombs. One of these was the so-called François vase, the most famous vase in the entire Archaeological Museum of Florence. I had a chance not too long ago to ask the assistant director of the museum, Dr. Mario Iozzo, to take me for an exclusive personal look at this famous Greek vase found in Tuscany near the modern town of Cianciano Terme. I was, by the way, almost hit by a motorcycle trying to make this video for you as I entered the Florence Archaeological Museum, so take a look. But Etruscans nonetheless wanted the elegant culture of ancient Greece in their tombs. The Etruscans had an enormous fondness for Greek art and developed their own imitations of Greek temples. They also imported Greek pottery, which could be proudly displayed and could accompany the dead to the afterworld.
The vase bears the name of Alessandro François, an Italian quote-unquote archaeologist of French origin, who was at that time the war commissar for the Grand Dukes of Tuscany. And he asked the Grand Duke the permission to dig in an area around Chiusi, where he found the vase in 1844. The François vase is very important because it is one of the largest symposium vase made in Athens, which means a big mixing bowl for wine and water. It is painted and potted by two men of whose we know the names, Ergotimos, the potter, and Cleitias, the painter. And they were so aware of what they were doing that they have signed the vase twice on each side. And it has 270 figures of the Greek mythology painted on it, and 130 inscriptions, Greek inscriptions, by which, of course, they also taught the Etruscans some words and some mythology. This is the main frieze of the vase, the most important one, the only one who goes all around the vase, while the rest of the myths are represented one on one side and one on this side. It is the wedding procession for Peleus and Thetis' marriage, Achilles' parents. And this is the place where the potter and the painter have signed their vase. Here, under Peleus' hand, who shakes Charon's hands, Charon's the center, he welcomes the first of the row. There is the inscription Cleitias megrafsen, Cleitias painted me. And here, after Dionysos, the most important god who is right in the center of the vase, and it is the largest figure of all friezes. There is under the nozzle of these white hordes, once white hordes, there is the other inscription, Ergotimos me poiesen, Ergotimos potted me. So it is the vase that speaks in first person, not the two men, because this would have been not possible. Risking to make some blasphemy, it is popularly called the Holy Bible of mythology because it has several myths painted on it related to the figure of Achilles, Theseus, and mainly the wedding Pompeii, the wedding procession for Peleus and Thetis, Achilles' parents. That was a very important mythological subject for the first half of the 6th century BC, because we have it painted on a few large vases made in Athens and sent to Etruria.
From mainland Greece and South Italy, the Etruscans could learn about Greek temples and how they could be constructed, admiring the beautiful marble and fine stone and the attention to detail that the Greek temple provided. richest Etruscans loved to surround themselves with Greek art. They often took the Greek myths and embellished them with their own religious beliefs, which included many fierce demons that blocked one's passage or transition from this world to the next. Their love of Greek myth and monsters is shown by a famous work of art in the Florence Archaeological Museum, probably made in the Etruscan community of Arezzo. It shows a monstrous creature, the Chimera, who was killed by the royal Greek hero of Corinth named Bellerophon. The Chimera breathed fire and was a mixture of snaky tail, goat's body, and lion's head, and Bellerophon, who was atoning for a sin against the gods, was forced to ride his magical horse Pegasus and slay the creature. The most famous of all the Etruscan monsters that have come down to us is the Chimera of Arezzo.
Dunque, questa è la Chimera d'Arezzo. D'Arezzo è a tutti gli effetti il numero 1 del Museo Archeologico di Firenze. Uno dei motivi è anche perché è l'unico grande bronzo così antico conservatosi integro fino a noi, grande bronzo etrusco naturalmente, completamente etrusco. Siamo alla fine del V, inizi del IV secolo a.C. e il donario doveva essere completato dalla figura di Bellerofonte che, cavalcando Pegaso, volteggiava intorno, sopra la chimera e la colpiva a morte. La testa di capra è già completamente reclinata, quindi è una parte dell'animale che è già morto ed ha una grande ferita appunto che spilla sangue sul collo e ci sono altre ferite sulle gambe. Quindi questo ruggito con cui la chimera si rivolge verso il suo aggressore probabilmente è l'ultima difesa verso chi la stava uccidendo. L'iscrizione è sulla gamba destra, Tinixville, che appunto è dedicato, oggetto sacro a Tinia, con ogni probabilità questa è la lettura più corrente.
The most popular image that is found on Etruscan sarcophagi, cinerary urns, and wall painting, and sometimes on pottery, is actually the journey to the underworld. And there is evidence that there was actually a multi-stage journey to the underworld that started with a banquet, and then the demon would meet the deceased, take them to the underworld. They would maybe travel on a boat, maybe fight off a sea monster or some other demon that's scary, and then they would meet their ancestors at the gates to the city of the dead, where they would have another banquet with their ancestors.
We are in front of one of the late sarcophagi from the territory of Orvieto. This comes from Torre San Severo, and it has a series of very interesting images carved on this type of volcanic stone, which is the material that it is made out of. On both sides of this sarcophagus we have a winged figure of a female demon. She's holding in one hand a bearded snake, and we can call her maybe a Vant or a Laza, and she's approaching, both of them are tending to the center of the sarcophagus, where we have a very well built scene which is not as Etruscan as the demoness that were on both sides. This is more Greek connected because it is the sacrifice of the prisoners from Troy in honor of the deceased Patroclus, who was the cousin and lover of Achilles, who is performing the sacrifice right here in the middle. And the scene is very familiar with other things that we've seen also in Etruria, like the very famous Francois tomb, where we have exactly the same painting, and where the artist of the Etruscans added what? 2 demons on the back. So there was some kind of things that they could follow, the main theme, and then they were adding pieces that were more similar to what was their idea of the general integration of the scene. And as you see here, he is basically cutting the throat of this first prisoner, and Patroclus is on the back with a bandage that keeps his jaw in place. He is already dead. And on the same sarcophagus, but on the other side, we have, again, two demons on the far ends, male in this case, probably it's Tukulka or Kerun, while in the middle we have another scene of sacrifice. It's probably Iphigenia that's been sacrificed this time. And Kerun here is shown as usually as a bearded demon, pointed ears, big huge nose, and again a snake in his hand, but also his very regular weapon, which is usually the hammer. It is with this hammer that basically he is sure that the souls, the deceased, are really souls, and they must be dead before he brings them to the underworld.
The Etruscans always had a penchant for menacing monsters, threatening the afterlife. As Rome grew in power and defeated the Etruscan city-states one by one in the 4th and 3rd centuries BCE, the Etruscan religion became, well, gloomier, and in their tombs and on their pottery, the imagery became darker and more frightening. The necropolis near the Tuscan town of Sarteano has produced a remarkable tomb that shows the darkly religious practices of the Etruscans. Around 400 BCE, after the Etruscans were beginning to be defeated, one city-state after another, by the imperialistic Romans, we see the Etruscans just failing to unite into one massive army. The Romans are slowly picking them apart until, by the 1st century BC, one city after another had fallen, and Etruria was largely just a memory. The Etruscans, while they were flourishing, were known for being one of the most deeply religious and even fatalistic peoples of the Mediterranean. Each Etruscan community had its own collection of spirits, but they also shared many divinities and often fused them with divinities from Greece, changing around the Greek stories and embellishing the attributes of the divinities. They had a particular fondness for gods or divinities with monstrous and frightening aspects, often resorting to depicting them with snaky legs or snaky hair or even wings. The tomb of the infernal quadriga of Sarteano, excavated by Dr. Alessandra Minetti, shows the Etruscan obsession with hideous monsters and demons that got in the way of one's passage to the afterlife. A happy afterlife often involved scenes of dining at some sort of a divine banquet, but getting to that joyful state wasn't easy. There might be a hideous demon driving a chariot, or snaky monsters to deter you from your goal. Come with me and have a closer look as Dottoressa Minetti explains this tomb especially for us.
Questa tomba è stata scoperta l'11 ottobre del 2003 nel corso delle annuali campagne di scavo che il Museo Archeologico di Sarteano conduce dall'estate del 2000 con il gruppo archeologico Etruria in concessione di scavo dal Ministero. Questa tomba è particolarmente importante perché si tratta di una delle poche tombe dipinte rinvenute nel territorio chiusino e poi perché è una tomba di IV secolo, infatti si data intorno al 330-320 a.C., quindi molto più rara delle tombe dipinte arcaiche che sono molto più diffuse, e poi la sua eccezionalità consiste nella conservazione straordinaria dei colori e nelle scene che sono praticamente delle scene uniche con una iconografia che è attestata soltanto all'interno di questa tomba. Nella prima scena che troviamo subito dopo l'ingresso alla tomba c'è questa straordinaria figura di demone, raffigurato con una zanna ferina che gli fuoriesce dal labbro, in una veste rossa, alla guida di un carro, rappresentato in maniera molto realistica con il parapetto e la ruota. Si tratta di una figura unica di demone, sicuramente rappresenta il Carun etrusco, corrispondente del Caronte greco, cioè il demone che accompagnava le anime nell'aldilà. E la nostra rappresentazione trova dei contatti con l'iconografia di Caronte di ambito orvietano. La figura del demone si inserisce all'interno di una scena più ampia, caratterizzata dalla rappresentazione di 4 animali, 2 leoni e 2 grifoni. Questi animali sono chiaramente animali fantastici, quindi non appartengono a una quadriga reale, ma a una quadriga appunto dell'oltretomba, una quadriga fantastica, e sono tutti inseriti all'interno di questa grande nuvola nera che caratterizza nel IV secolo le figure appartenenti al mondo dell'oltretomba. Al di sotto di questa frattura che noi vediamo, fatta sicuramente da scavatori clandestini recenti, si dipana questa scena complessa con queste sovrapporsi di corpi e zampe che danno la dimensione anche della grande capacità artistica del nostro pittore. Questa invece è la seconda scena della tomba e rappresenta un banchetto funebre con i 2 defunti rappresentati appunto distesi sopra una cline, cioè il letto triclinare, sopra dei cuscini e con un tipico atteggiamento di saluto. La figura di destra è sicuramente il padre che accoglie il figlio giovane, rappresentato con una carnagione più scura perché il giovane è colui che fa i giochi atletici all'aperto. Si tratta quindi probabilmente del pater familias, cioè il proprietario della tomba, che accoglie il figlio morto prematuramente nell'aldilà. Qui invece siamo nella parte più profonda e più interna della camera tombale e su questa parete è rappresentato un enorme serpente a 3 teste, che significa la rappresentazione di un mostro che popola l'oltretomba. Infatti il serpente è l'animale ctonio per eccellenza e rappresenta agli occhi degli Etruschi la possibilità di un incontro mostruoso durante il loro viaggio verso l'aldilà. Questo serpente trova dei confronti molto stringenti con delle ceramiche orvietane della seconda metà del IV e questa e la provenienza dell'iconografia di Caronte ci danno la certezza che i pittori che hanno dipinto questa tomba siano orvietani. Sulla parete di fondo invece si sviluppa questo grande ippocampo, un animale fantastico metà cavallo e metà pesce, un animale marino simbolico del viaggio verso l'oltretomba, perché il passaggio fra lo stato terreno e lo stato marino per gli Etruschi era il simbolo del tuffo e del passaggio fra la vita e la morte. Questo sarcofago posto sulla parete di fondo accoglieva il corpo dell'inumato e del proprietario della tomba, quindi del pater familias, colui che aveva fatto costruire e dipingere questo ipogeo. L'elemento straordinario di questo sarcofago è che è fatto in alabastro volterrano, importato dalla città di Volterra ma lavorato sul posto da maestranze chiusine, e rappresenta così il capostipite di tutta la produzione dei sarcofagi chiusini, in quanto è l'unico databile con certezza in base alle ceramiche e alle pitture che lo inseriscono fra il 330 e il 320 a.C.
The Etruscan tombs were, at least at first, primarily constructed with the aristocracy in mind. But the movement toward democracy in Greece had an influence too into Etruria. More egalitarian necropolis, or cities of the dead, began to spring up, such as we may see at the Crocefisso Cemetery in Umbria, Italy, about an hour's car ride north of Rome, in the beautiful town of Orvieto. It's perched high on a cliff that was a prime piece of real estate in Etruscan times, until the Romans came in just after the middle of the 3rd century BC and destroyed it. At Cerveteri, the wealthy Etruscan ruling class could have magnificent tombs. But not every Etruscan was super rich, as we see in the Crocifisso cemetery at Orvieto.
Right now we are looking at one of the small sections of the entire annular necropolis of Orvieto, which means that the tombs went all around the bottom of the cliff, the base of the big volcanic rock on which the city has been growing since at least the 6th century BC. And one portion, like the one here called Crocifisso del Tufo, because there's a small church on top that has a crucifix carved into the rock, it gives you the possibility of understanding several aspects connected with the urban look, the way that the tombs are organized, and also some of the social information that we can get out of the layout of the tombs themselves. First of all, as you see, the tombs are very similar one to another, so there is not that much differences that run between one family and another family. That are not, maybe they were not allowed to have these differences clearly shown, as we see in other necropolises, like think about Cerveteri, for example, where you have huge tumuli. Here everything is organized in what we would describe as an isonomic or egalitarian way. So everybody has the same probably social weight, but also economical means. So everybody has a chance to build their own tombs. They're still private tombs, but following a pattern, especially for what concerns the urban layout of this, which is a real necropolis. It's really a city of the dead. Just like on top of the cliff, we had a city of the living people. Aveles, so Aulos, Flusenas. So I'm the tomb of Aulus of the Flusenas family. This would be the message, for whoever would be walking here, they know who was the owner of this single tomb. On this other side, though, we have a very different type of situation. The length of the inscription is much, much shorter. The letters are bigger in general, and there is just one name. We're missing the MI part here, not because it's been erased, but it's because it was never here. And it says Aesias, ice, and the term itself, it's connected with the root god or divinity. So this entire monument has probably been dedicated to the gods, because the owner did something that the city didn't in fact accept, so it had to be erased. It was more or less what we described in the Roman times as a damnatio memoriae. Or maybe the building, the structure, the monument has been hit, let's say, by a lightning, which means that it is then to be connected only with a sacred space. In that case, it would be like a fulgor conditum, again using a Roman word for it. The idea of burying or dedicating to the god the object that the god has so clearly asked for, like in this case, the monument itself. And in fact, as you can see, the inscription itself would have gone down to this point, and then it was erased. So we have a different elevation here on the rock, and then we have the last inscription dedicating it again.
Orvieto è stata un'importante città etrusca. Il suo nome era Versna, Volsini in lingua latina. È sorta come le altre città etrusche nel IX secolo a.C., è divenuta una città più importante a partire dalla seconda metà del VI secolo a.C. e ha concluso la sua fase nel 264 a.C., quando i Romani fecero un intervento molto duro. La città venne distrutta e gli abitanti trasferiti su delle alture vicino al lago di Bolsena.
Dr. Alba Frascarelli has been program coordinator for the study abroad program of the University of Arizona in Orvieto, Italy. And we've been colleagues and archaeologists together for more than 20 years now. Dr. Frascarelli is taking part in an extraordinary excavation of the Etruscan homeland and the center of Etruscan civilization, actually, at a place which we call now Campo della Fiera. It's the place where all the Etruscans, all the city-states, seem to have come together to worship a god named Voltumnus and to have meetings and festivals annually. Dr. Frascarelli has been excavating this with the University of Perugia for quite a long time, the University of Macerata. It's been under the direction of Simonetta Stopponi, of the University of Perugia now, and the results have been amazing.
I'm Alba Fascarelli, and I'm the program manager for the Arizona in Italy program, study abroad program. The archaeological research at Campo della Fiera, nearby Orvieto, began in year 2000, so it's been 16 years that the University of Macerata first and the University of Perugia then have been working on this site, under the direction of Professor Simonetta Stopponi. And that has been an extraordinary adventure for us and for the hundreds of students that from Italian and American universities have been working with us. I think that the most important result that we had in these years is that we now finally can say that what we've been uncovering is the Fanum Voltumne, that is the legendary federal sanctuary for the Etruscan Confederation. That site had been searched for centuries. Even in the Renaissance, they were asking themselves where the Fanum Voltumne was to be located. And at this point, the number and the importance of the finds that we have makes us think that this is what we have. We started finding two big, large Etruscan and then Roman paved roads, which of course were necessary in a sanctuary like that had to host hundreds and hundreds of people from all the different Etruscan cities joining for the annual festivals at the Fanum. And then we discovered at least 3 Etruscan temples. One of them in particular is the smallest one, but has the longest life, so to say, because it was renovated in the 3rd century BC after Orvieto, the Etruscan Velsna, was conquered by the Romans. And then even Augustus himself restored the temple, the floor of the temple, and we know that in that area there was a cult during the Roman times, because we were lucky enough to find next to an Etruscan altar a Roman thesaurus, that is a container for coins that were given to the temple. There were still over 220 Roman silver and bronze coins in the thesaurus, and they date from the 2nd century BC till 7 BC. So it covers the late Republican and the early Augustan times. And that is pretty unusual, because usually Etruscan sanctuaries were abandoned in the Roman times. So this is one of the pieces of evidence that makes us think that this was an extraordinarily important site for the Etruscans, and hence the Romans decided to keep it alive. A couple of years ago, I was digging very close to this altar where the thesaurus was also found, actually under it, because we had to lift it to restore it, and we took advantage of this to dig underneath. And after just a few hours of digging under the altar, I started finding some terracotta cross, part of a head, and it ended up being a perfectly preserved bust of an Etruscan god, we believe, in terracotta, that was set on a molded base. That the moldings of this base recall exactly the same moldings that we have on a votive monument nearby, also found in the area. And we believe that the head, this male head, that has this very complex hairstyle and is a bearded figure, might well be Voltumna himself. It doesn't look like a worshipper. It's most probably the image of a god. And it looks a little bit like the Voltumna, like the Veltune that is represented on an Etruscan mirror from Tuscania. We know that Voltumna, that for the Etruscans was Veltune, was called the princeps of the Etruscan gods during the Roman time. So it was to be considered the most important, the most relevant of the Etruscan gods. It is a pretty puzzling figure, because the descriptions that we have from the Latin sources tell us about an ever-changing figure. So even the iconography is a little hard to define, but it was probably tied to Tinia, meaning that it could be one of the aspects of Tinia that was the Etruscan version, so to say, of Zeus. Well, this summer, for example, we were digging there. It was over 100 degrees. We were dying because of the heat, but still there was no other place in the world I wanted to be. I mean, I feel perfectly happy to be there, and I'm so concentrated on what I'm doing. It's the fact that you digging up that dirt, you are able to reconstruct what happened over 25, maybe 25 centuries ago. It's a big responsibility, of course. So that's why I'm always feeling so concentrated and I'm completely absorbed by it. But it's also such a rewarding experience. And it's not only what you find. Of course, if you find a perfectly preserved bust, it's nice, it's exciting, but the process in itself, it's what is most rewarding. And so even the days in which we're not finding anything too exciting, but the process, the technique, the research that we're doing is what we really love, what I really love. If someone wants to go and try participating into an archaeological dig, he or she should be ready for some really hard physical work. Sometimes it's really challenging to be under the sun working. You don't have to imagine an archaeologist being with a brush in his hands. It's a lot of picking, shoveling, wheelbarrow. So you have to try it, and then you might either love it or hate it. Most often it's either love or hate. If you love it, be aware that it might be something that you'll never heal from.
Like the Villanovans before them, the Etruscans were superb metal workers, but the processing of the iron in northwestern Tuscany, in the metal-rich area of Populonia, was difficult, and it took a toll on the workers. D.H. Lawrence, that famous writer of the earlier 20th century, wrote in his book Etruscan Places about how much the Etruscans enjoyed life and living based on the tomb paintings that he had viewed at sites such as Tarquinia. But at Populonia, we get a different view of these same Etruscans. Watch. The emotional, sensual D.H. Lawrence wrote in his Etruscan Places in 1929, "Death to the Etruscans was a pleasant continuance of life, with jewels and wine and flutes playing for the dance. It was just a natural continuance of the fullness of life. Everything was in terms of life and of living." That's what Lawrence said. He disliked big museums and scholarly scientific investigation of the Etruscans, preferring instead to value his own emotional response to them. But were they really always so full of love and life? To answer that question, we must visit Populonia in northwestern Tuscany.
Mining and metallurgy in the ancient world is fairly uniform throughout the Greek, Roman, and Etruscan civilizations. Mining is done in two primary ways. If it's a valuable metal, and it's worth doing what's called deep vein mining, which means you dig far into the ground, and deep shafts into the ground. And those are usually no more than a meter high. But that's fairly rare. especially because metals like iron occur so commonly and so close to the surface that what's called open cast mines, which are just large pits in the earth, can be worked in, and metals can be extracted from fairly close to the surface. We know this is what happens with the Etruscans, especially around Populonia, which from a very early period is a center of metal production in the Mediterranean. The area around the Etruscan center of Populonia is blessed with a mountain of metals. In fact, that's actually the name of the range of hills near Populonia. They're called the Colline Metallifera, the metal-bearing hills, because they're just so rich and dense with metals. We know that Populonia was a metallurgical production center from a very early time in the Mediterranean, and produced metals like iron, but also lead and silver, some gold, and even some tin, which is actually really rare for the Mediterranean to have a tin production.
The work was made principally by slaves because it was hard, and there was lots of pollution in the air in the industry of this job. The owner of the manufacture was a free man, but the people who work in the process were principally slaves. To make iron, they need oven where cooking iron, making a not too big circular, generally circular oven, and put inside it a layer of urn called hematite, in this case for Populonia, and charcoal, hematite and charcoal. Then during the process of firing, the hematite was divided, and on the bottom of the oven came the iron, and outside the iron slag. Every time they have to broken the oven to take the iron to be sold, and we archaeologists find as traces of iron smelting the iron slag, so the trash of the work. Populonia is wonderful because it's the only Etruscan city built on the sea. And if you come and you want to visit the remains of Etruscan civilization of Populonia, you can visit their necropolis, built starting from the 7th century BCE until the beginning of Romanization, so until 4th and 3rd century BCE.
By the time that the 7th century BCE was done, the Etruscans were already in Rome and in control. The Etruscan king, Tarquinius Priscus, is credited with undertaking an enormous task, draining the constantly flooding Roman Forum and bringing a drainage system to improve it so it would be possible to construct buildings in it. Nicola Terrinato of the University of Michigan is a world-recognized authority on early Rome and its collision with the Etruscans.
They build it up from about 6 meters above sea level to maybe 9 to 10 meters above sea level. Then they are at least looking at more like exceptional flooding rather than, routine seasonal flooding.
Now here we are in the Roman Forum, and this place gets pretty crowded with tourists. And maybe with all these rocks and stones around that have fallen into ruin, it's pretty hard to reconstruct what it was like 2,000 years ago. And I hope with a little bit of imagination, maybe we can bring it to life for you.
Dovete aiutarci a soffiare sempre più calda in modo che possa incendiare la paglia. Preparatevi prima.